before we do that, we have this great panel of key decision makers and leaders in Vermont. Each of them are aware of the wide diversity of this network in terms of expertise, in terms of sectors represented, in terms of political opinions. And so we want to take the chance to step back and hear from them at a high level. What are their key priorities? What big questions do they have about Vermont's energy future? And what do they see as the opportunities, and what areas of focus are there for them as they look to the future? So at this point, I want to, the lineup that we will be going with is, first we will hear from State Senator Becca Balint, Majority Leader in the Senate. Then we will hear from Speaker of the House Mitzi Johnson, and then from PUC Chairman Anthony Roisman. So if the timing is ready, I would invite the panelists to the stage. We're going to have a kind of opening remarks from each of them. Then I'll have a couple of questions, but at the same time, you should, as we did yesterday, please feel free to go to Slido, SLIDO.com, enter in EAN Summit 2020, and you can pose questions there. You can, even if you don't write your own question, upvote other questions that you see that you want to see posed. And so we'll do that for the Q&A portion of the panel as well. So at this point, I would, unless Carolyn, you have anything that we should, that I missed.
Well, I just want to invite Chair Roisman to click share audio and video now and see if we can get you up onto the stage. And but maybe while we do that, we can have Senator Balint get started, and then when he comes on, we'll see if his audio is working.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Feel free to take it away, Senator Balint.
Thank you, Jared. Good morning to all of you. Thank you, Jared, for inviting me to participate today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Senator Becca Balint from Windham County, and I'm also the Majority Leader in the Senate. And I want to start this morning by acknowledging what so many of us are feeling these days. Fear and worry, anxiety for our nation, our future, our planet. As a parent, I'm worried for my kids and what their lives will be like when they're my age, if we don't start making some big course corrections now. And as a politician, I'm disheartened by the cynicism I see at the federal level and how pure ego seems to drive so much of the conversation and not science and reason. So it makes perfect sense that we all feel somewhat discouraged and distressed. And I want you to know that I'm saying it out loud because I've learned that when we name something, when we call it out and we shed some light on it, the process of doing this takes away some of its power over us. And so what I want you to know is that although I have a clear-eyed view of where we are, I am not paralyzed. Despite all the bad news during the past 4 years, I remain an optimist. And really, how can I be anything but an optimist after seeing all of those pitches yesterday? I believe we are creative and resilient and clever. I believe that most of us want to work for the greater good, for our neighbors, for our communities and our state. And I know that this virtual room is filled with smart and dedicated people from across Vermont, people united with a sense of purpose. And I know if I were in a big hall with all of you, we could all feel the energy and it would be palpable. And unfortunately, this global pandemic has forced all of us into a kind of isolation. But I want you to think about what Jared and Carolyn and the rest of the EAN crew pulled off yesterday. We had a great conversation and we heard some really exciting pitches. And last night I was telling Carolyn just how hopeful and inspired I was when I signed off from the conference that what I'd seen and heard in the presentations really made me feel excited. So I'm feeling ready to build on the great success we had in the legislature in passing the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was no easy feat to pull off while legislating over Zoom for months. And we had terrific partners in Representative Tim Brigland and Senator Chris Bray. And I'm proud that we were able to hold our 2/3 majorities in both chambers to override the governor's veto. And what I want you to take from this is that so many House members and senators said, enough. We can't just hope and pray that things will get better for the planet or for us. We have to make them so. And I'm really proud to have worked so hard to pass that important bill into law. So after a celebratory drink last week, I turned my attention to next year. How will we build on this climate action? And I worry, what will be possible if we face a big budget deficit next year due to the pandemic? What will happen if we don't have a vaccine for COVID-19? Will our economy and our schools be open, or will they be shut down again? So of course, there's so much we can't anticipate, but that doesn't mean we still can't get a few balls rolling. And I said earlier that I know that we're resilient, and that is true, but I think it's even greater than that. I think that we're often irrepressible. We adapt, we shift, we make things work. We see little bits of possibility in the midst of emergencies. That's what we've seen in this horrible pandemic too. For years, my Senate Committee on Economic Development has been talking about the change in work habits and how we need to adapt to new remote work culture. And we made some headway. But we had struggles convincing some of our colleagues that Vermonters were interested in remote work. But now look at us. Thousands and thousands of Vermonters are working remotely, and many want to continue to do so even after we come out of this health crisis. So the global output of carbon emissions dropped dramatically this spring and this summer. And yes, it's true those numbers will probably creep up again as we fully reopen the world's economy. But let's concentrate on what we've learned. Millions upon millions of Americans do not need to drive to work every day. And we must continue to build on the infrastructure to make it possible to stop this commuting madness. That means we must continue to work and invest in broadband deployment. Perhaps we should consider investments and incentives for businesses who encourage their workforce to work remotely when they can. The state itself, as a very large employer, should think carefully about developing permanent work options so the entire workforce doesn't need to come into the office every day. Maybe we can finally make headway on a fee-bait program or a buyback program to let big polluting cars and trucks get off the road. Or maybe we'll fully electrify our buses and consolidate efforts to unify a broad system of electrified mass transit. There was so much for us to chew on from the transportation pitches that we heard yesterday. As a longtime member of the Senate Economic Development and Housing Committee, I was particularly interested in hearing the pitches on thermal energy. Excuse me. We absolutely need to continue this push to weatherize our homes. Like so many Vermonters, I'm sure many of you, I live in a house that's over 100 years old. And my spouse and I have made significant investments to make our house more energy efficient. But we have the means to do so, and so many Vermonters do not. As we heard in the pitch from the Northeast Kingdom yesterday, and from the Rights and Democracy pitch, and from the VT Warms pitch, we must democratize the energy revolution. And the funding for these really important efforts will have to come from multiple streams. The investment to weatherize over 100,000 homes will be significant, but it's really not insurmountable. We are creative and irrepressible. I know that all legislators are deeply concerned about the hole that we'll be facing the state revenue picture come January. And I don't want to minimize the dire financial situation that we might find ourselves in. But history has shown us time and time again that adversity gives birth to ingenuity. And I'm really excited to see what's to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Balint. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Speaker of the House, Mitzi Johnson. Madam Speaker, please share your reflections and vision looking ahead with the network.
Thanks, Jared. And thanks for having me. This is logging into Hopin for my first time. Actually gave me a chance to empathize with some of the, let's just say, non-digital natives in the House that struggled with Zoom a few months ago, and maybe even a few days ago, as we were transitioning here, and it's you know, one of the cool opportunities here is the amount of learning that is happening in such a compressed time period. You know, I've heard some estimates that that we basically jumped ahead 10 or 12 years in our understanding of technology, our sort of learning and growing a new skill set, and our ability to envision a different way of working and living and interacting. And I was actually on in a discussion last night with about rural Vermont in my community and what my community needed to do, and isolation. We were having a conversation specifically about isolation for seniors, and had a terrific little side conversation about what a cool thing it would be to pair some of the middle schoolers or early high schoolers with seniors to help with some of that technology learning and the isolation and the loneliness. That was a total aside. I always love listening to Senator Balint and her just weaving in sort of that core spirit of Vermont with the plans for the future and what we need to do to really make Vermont a place that works for everybody and to build that stronger, healthier future. And so we are at this critical moment in time right now to be able to capitalize on the optimism, the hope, and the energy that she talked about for our future. Pair it with a bunch of the skills and new norms that we have been forced into learning because of the pandemic, and use those things as really critical tools to basically operationalize the Paris Climate Accord. The Global Warming Solutions Act that you all know so well, and thank you so much to each of you watching for your advocacy and your engagement and your patience and your persistence. Because there was a point where getting the 76 votes in the House was a tough call, and then building that momentum to get a substantial number of sponsors for the bill. And then when it became clear that we needed to get 100 votes to put it into law, you all stuck together and helped move us there. And this bill is our opportunity to operationalize the goals that we have been talking about for years and years and years, and that you all have really initiated and helped me see a path through to make it work. We have, you know, that bill before us is about planning, accountability, and resiliency, and so we're now in the stages. I am in the stage of trying to find the right just doers and movers and shakers to put on that panel to make sure that we can really meet that strong international standard, so that Vermont can keep up with the rest of the world while the United States as a whole falls behind. I think we have an opportunity to join other states that are doing critical work and really show how we can use this opportunity and use use a transformation of certain sectors, specifically housing, heating, transportation, to start with, to really build a 21st century economy, to grow different jobs, to help transition people into new skills, to help develop a better workforce housing, to develop transportation opportunities that provide people safer, more reliable ways of getting to work, and really make sure that everybody is included. The pitches that you've outlined are such a complete picture of what we need to be stepping forward to do. And so I am hoping that as these pitches develop, that they can be woven into the work of the Climate Council and the recommendations of the Climate Council, so that we can start, sort of ticking down our emissions and really moving into a stronger energy future with all Vermonters at the table. One of the things that concerns me about the pandemic, and about the pace of change in our society, is who we're leaving behind. And it has been drastic. And like, I feel like the pandemic is a lot like the presidency right now, to be quite blunt. It hasn't necessarily created new difficulties, new conflict, new sources of gaps in our society. It has simply unveiled what exists. And the work in some of your pitches to expand accessibility to these programs across income and race and geography and gender is really critical to making sure that we're bringing everybody along, and combining that work with the building standards, the worker housing, and all the different transportation opportunities in some of the other pitches is the only way we're going to get Vermont to a place where we really are meeting our emissions goals and our energy goals, and acting responsibly for the planet and for our future. So really excited to be here, really excited to continue working with you, and looking forward to hearing your new thoughts and ideas.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. As you were concluding your remarks, one of the things that it brought me back to was, if there was any takeaway from the day one of the summit yesterday, it was, if anyone has any question that Vermont can meet the Paris requirement, and that doing so can be incredibly beneficial for Vermont consumers, the Vermont economy, and in reducing energy inequities, I think that those questions yesterday went a long way to putting those to rest. I mean, the great work, for instance, that we saw from EAN Senior Fellow Lee Seddon, I think the Path to Paris model and graphic in terms of known and proven technologies and best practices was the most shared graphic I saw up on this stage yesterday. And as you said, those pitches, not just individually, but as a package that really honed in on where we have the greatest amounts of both challenge and opportunity with our pollution, and also with our energy cost burden. So thank you for making that connection to those ideas. And now that it's not just a goal, but a requirement to meet the Paris Agreement, the key role that a lot of those ideas will now play in terms of getting good work done. So thank you for that. Now I want to move over to inviting Public Utilities Commission Chairman Anthony Roisman to share some of his reflections on what he sees when he looks at Vermont's energy future and the opportunities ahead of us. After he shares his initial remarks, we will then move to some questions. A reminder, Carolyn has posted in the stage chat, I believe also in the event chat, for if you've got a tablet or a cell phone, that, so you don't have to go away from this screen, just go to slido.com and enter in, again, EAN Summit 2020 for those questions. But right now, I want to welcome Chairman Roisman to share his remarks with the network.
Thank you, Jared. Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me? Oh, good. All right. We were having some problems with that before. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and an honor to share the stage with the Speaker and the Senator. We at the PUC see the legislature only occasionally, and it's nice to be part of a program with both of you and to get a better idea of the energy that the legislature is generating to address this problem. One thing that I heard yesterday, and then I'm hearing again this morning, brings to mind this recent poetry book, Gus Speth, the leading environmentalist on climate change here in Vermont. It's entitled, "It's Already Tomorrow." And I think that's a message that I heard loud and clear throughout this conference. In fact, I wondered whether or not EAN might want to change its name from Environmental Action Network to Environmental Action Now. It's definitely time, and we don't have much time left. We at the PUC have a role to play. We are a quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial organization. The legislature gives us an agenda, and we function as a court in making decisions that seek to implement that agenda. The policy directives that we have from the legislature are clear, and they give us a lot of discretion in how we go about implementing those policy decisions. There is an enormous opportunity for individuals and organizations to actively participate in not only do we do siting, which is a significant piece of our work of various projects, power lines, substations, solar projects, generating facilities, but we also look at broader questions like rates. The net meter is a major part of our work, involves, according to a recent Department of Public Service report, about $37 million in subsidies that are supporting the expansion of solar development at the net metering level in Vermont. We are looking at and are anxious to hear from all of you ways in which we can leverage that $37 million into more control of carbon in Vermont. Already make a distinction in how much support a solar project gets based upon its siting. Projects that are sited next to the load that they're going to site get a different treatment. Projects that are put on top of landfills and other sites that have been actively disturbed get different treatment. We are also considering and would be interested to hear from all of you whether we should expand that kind of policy-oriented approach to solar. For instance, should we be thinking about linking the subsidy for a solar project to a weatherized home that Efficiency Vermont is able to support? Should we be looking at better rates for those people who put batteries in with their solar projects versus the people who have solar projects that are not that way. Be thinking differently about solar projects that are located in homes that are using electric heat pumps as opposed to oil or natural gas or propane for heating. Those kinds of considerations are in front of us now. We have a rulemaking that is in process dealing with net metering. And like in all our other decisions, we make our decisions based upon the evidence that we hear from the stakeholders. It's open, and we hope that all of you will walk through that door and bring us not only your ideas, but your evidence. Because at the end of the day, that quasi-judicial function requires us the evidence that we have to make our decisions. I would like to take this opportunity, since we've been talking about pitches, to make a pitch. We heard from many of those who are presenting pitches that part of what they want to do is to gather data. And this is critical. Everyone agrees that whatever we do, we need to do it based upon evidence. And data is what drives conduct. Jared talked yesterday about the importance of thinking of every new purchase being a carbon, the car, the heating, the energy generation. And in order to reach the communities that are most needing that kind of modification, we need communication. We need to be able to get the people who are going to ultimately make the decision, what's the next car I get? What's the next heating system I'm going to put into my home? What is the choice for me with regard to whether I should be of programs that are available to help me weatherize my home or to help me cover the cost of my energy? That community, the low and moderate income community, is also the same community that has the least ability of being communicated with in the way in which most communication takes place today. The vast majority of communication is done electronically. It's done in social media, it's done on the internet, it's done with email. But we know that in a large segment of the low and moderate income communities in Vermont, they do not have the broadband necessary to take advantage of that. We're not reaching them. And June Tierney, who's the commissioner of the Department of Public Service, speaks of convergence, that is recognizing the interconnection between having a broadband system that serves everybody in the state in order to implement all of the kinds of energy solutions that we're talking about. For example, you cannot have an effective program to utilize your heat pump if you're not able to connect to the utility so that they can control your usage and get peak shaving benefits. You cannot have the knowledge about where and how to get support for weatherizing your home if the bulk of that knowledge is being communicated through the internet or through email, social media, if you don't have a broadband connection that allows you to access it. So my pitch is, while talking about all the energy innovations, we need to be similarly committed to solving the communication problem in Vermont. Build the broadband network to build the electric beautification and beneficial expansion that everybody is talking about. So while that's not anything that we at the PUC can directly do, we do license and give certificates of public good to various types of televisions, and we would like to see a lot more of that happening in the areas in Vermont where it's really needed. We look forward to hearing from all of you as we proceed to do our task of helping implement the Global Warming Solutions Act, and look forward to hearing from the rest of the community in the near future.
Thank you so much, Chairman. So we've got Slido open. Some questions are starting to come in. Feel free to add more upvote questions you like. I'm going to kick it off with a question first for you, Chairman, and then I want to ask a similar question of Senator Balint and Speaker Johnson. But, as you know, as well as anyone, Vermont has led in the past with reform of power supply and a focus on renewables and efficiency. But as we all know, the pollution and the energy cost burden that is our biggest challenge right now is coming from those previously or less regulated fuel sectors. What do you see as the role of the PUC in making it possible for us to decarbonize the thermal sector, building fuel use, and the transportation sector? And specifically, do you think that there is a need for new regulatory frameworks to accomplish that would go kind of beyond the historic purview of the PUC?
Well, thank you for that question. The legislature has asked the PUC to report on both of those topics. We were asked and have produced 2 reports on electric vehicles in Vermont, both of which were published last year. The first one looked at the general question of electric vehicles, what are the barriers, how can they be addressed? And the second one addressed this question of in what way should electric vehicles be paying at part of the cost for infrastructure to keep the highway system operating. The legislature also, and we are in the midst of doing a study on all fuels and how all be taxed, if at all, and what we should do about all fuels. That's it's known generally as Act 62, which was the statute that implemented this obligation. We issued a draft report in January. We will issue the final report this January. So we are trying to use our ability to bring lots of people together who bring us lots of information. We've had literally hundreds of people participating in both of those studies, and use the expertise of the staff of the Public Utility Commission is extraordinarily experienced and very bright people. And so we've tried to put all that together. In the Act 62 report, we will come out with recommendations, but we're still not at that stage yet. So I think that's a keep your eye open. January 15th, I believe, is our legislative deadline, and we will meet the deadline. Fortunately, we are able to operate remotely and have been doing so since March of this year. So we'll be on schedule with that report.
Thank you, Chairman. And similarly, Senator Balint and Speaker Johnson, when you think about kind of policy frameworks or opportunities to make progress in those sectors where we have the greatest amount of pollution and energy cost coming from in transportation and building fuel use, what are some of the opportunities that you see specifically there, or the key questions you have? I mean, it was interesting yesterday. There's some extent that people think, we should just learn from the success of policy models that were developed for other sectors. One of the last pitches of the day was a clean heat standard that's basically the idea of a renewable portfolio standard for the electric sector put over to the thermal sector in a vastly oversimplified way, as just one example. So I'm just kind of curious to hear how you think about the kind of policy needs and opportunities of those two sectors in particular?
I think it's for those two sectors of transportation and heating, they are well documented to be the top sources of emissions. So they are the key places that we need to go. I think the place where there's some intersection with a lot of other policy and a lot of other key partners to move some of these complicated issues forward is that transportation is one of the biggest hurdles to moving people out of poverty and getting people into more jobs and work. We'll see how that translates, as Vermont and hopefully the country eventually move out of pandemic mode and back to a new normal, which I hope, as the senator outlined a vision, is a very different new normal. So I think with transportation already being well documented as one of the hurdles to Vermonters, and housing and housing costs, which of course include heating and energy costs, being one of the other key hurdles for Vermonters, particularly lower income Vermonters. And as we are getting, we're getting a lot of pandemic migrants right now, to be followed, I think, closely behind by climate change migrants. The southern part of the state is seeing an enormous influx of people, and it's starting to trickle north. So I think so I guess that the nexus there was that is only intensifying some of the housing costs and lack of availability, layered on top of the lack of availability and our very old housing stock. I believe, are we still second oldest in the country? I think the policies that we have been working on for a number of years to kind of nibble away at those problems are just going to become more important. And there are some, I think, key initiatives that have started there in electrification of our transportation network, and really working that problem from both sides, from the supply side and the demand side, creating a demand for electric cars and creating a better supply of charging stations and infrastructure so that those cars are more viable. I think that's just the beginning. We have a long way to go to move that program to the place where it's accessible for all income levels. And I think on the housing side, just beginning to tweak our efficiency charges with a small pilot to look at a very small percentage of Efficiency Vermont's scope being directed toward reducing emissions in places that, in our heating and transportation sectors where it overlaps with our electric grid and our electric sectors. That's another sort of key pilot. So looking at those two kind of sectors and really being able to push forward on both of them, take full advantage to address some of the problems that we've laid out earlier, I think would be important initial steps.
Thank you. Senator Balint?
Can you hear me, Jared?
Yes.
Okay. So a couple things. As the commissioner said, the all fuel study is going to be coming to the legislature in January. And I know there are a number of senators keenly interested in what those recommendations are going to be. We know that we are a national leader in terms of the work that Efficiency Vermont has done in terms of electric power and efficiency there. And we know that there's a lot more work that we can do on looking at all fuels efficiency. It goes to what the speaker was just saying. One of the things that was brought up yesterday that hasn't really come into this conversation yet, except tangentially, which I know it's on all of our minds, but I just want to make sure we make it explicit, which is that we need to center this work in equity. We have a terrible problem across Vermont with poverty. And I see it in my county. I'm in Windham County, as the speaker just said. We have a housing crunch. We've had a housing crunch that rivals the one in Chittenden County. We continue to have it. It's getting worse because of the migration happening because of the pandemic. So the work that we're doing going forward around transportation and around housing and thermal energy has to be centered in issues of equity. We know that people most impacted are people at the lower end of the income spectrum. We know from the presentation yesterday from Rights and Democracy, there's also a racial component here in terms of who is carrying more of the burden and who is generating more of the pollution. And so it is, whatever that we do going forward absolutely has to be centered in this work of how do we make sure that we're addressing this across the income spectrum, across the racial spectrum, and geographically. You know, in many ways, what's happening in Windham County is not so different from what's happening in the Northeast Kingdom in terms of the burden that people have in terms of their rental costs, their heating costs, and transportation. And so I know that we have a lot of work ahead of us within the Senate to really dive into what that all fuel study is going to say. But I know that there are so many senators who are on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee that are absolutely ready to do that work. And although most of my expertise right now is on the housing side, I know that having both the focus on the thermal and on the transportation, it's going to happen this year because we need both. And I know that the speaker knows that as well.
Thank you all. I want to go to a question that first came in. I'll refresh my feed as well after that. But last I looked, Ian Hitchcock from the Vermont Natural Resources Council had posed a question that had a number of upvotes that is related to drawing on the expertise that exists across this network and across Vermont into the Climate Council. So what I would ask is, now that this framework has been legally established, what do you feel like you need and would be most helpful in terms of actually helping this effort succeed? How can network members who are watching right now, what role do you see? You know, and there's such a diversity. We have, you know, network members from utilities to, you know, analysts to institutions of higher education. Are there any kind of specific asks or recommendations you would make to the folks watching now in terms of ways that you hope that they engage and could be most helpful in helping this framework succeed from your perspective?
So, Jared, just so that I understand the question, are you talking broadly speaking? What are actually?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who are kind of wondering, okay, now this framework is established in law and they want, and you all are committed to having it succeed. What do you see as the pathways that would be most helpful and productive for folks to engage?
So I want to bring this back to where we all are as Vermonters, which is we are parts of communities and neighborhoods. That conversations turn into policy and action when you have convinced enough of the people in your community that it matters specifically to them, that it's not some, you know, whether it's an extreme left view or an extreme right view, you know, what you have to do is find that common language to talk about these things. And so one of the people that drives me so much in the way that I do my work around climate change is the climate scientist, Catherine Hayhoe. And one of the things that she talks about is we have to get better about talking across difference and talking about class. And it is those, you know, individual conversations with people in our communities and our neighborhoods that try to box climate change. I mean, I had a bunch of emails this morning in my inbox about overriding the governor's veto last week and how we're completely out of touch. And what are we doing in the legislature? And we're going to remember in November. And it's this like fear. It's all fear-based. And so the way that we move the needle on this is to have those hard conversations within our communities and say, can we please not go to the fear-based argument yet. Can we talk about what do you get back when we make these investments? And so we cannot write off that huge swath of Vermonters who are scared that their costs are going to go up. That's a real fear that they have. We've got to get better about talking about it the way that Vermonters understand, which is long-term investments and being frugal and making the investments where it's going to pay the most back over time. And I just want to encourage all of us to get out of our comfort zones and talk to those people that we don't usually talk to at town meeting, don't really talk to when they attack us on social media, attack us, on email, because it happens to all of us. We got to take a deep breath and really understand that this is the only way we're going to make this happen.
Thanks, Senator. And I want to apologize to Ian. My view on my phone was cut a little short, so I want to specifically ask the end part of his question. And maybe this is mostly for you, Speaker Johnson, because of the key role that you have in nominations to the council. But there was a question, the latter part of it is anything that you can share about ideas, the process for ideas being shared with the council, or suggestions of potential nominees. If folks have ideas that they want to share with the council, or who should sit on that council, who should they share those with? Oh, sorry, we can't hear you.
I had myself muted.
There we go.
So actually I am sort of accepting suggestions right now for anybody that is interested, or if you have suggestions for people that are interested. There are quite a lot of people sending some suggestions, or nominations, I might say. So obviously no promises on everything. We've got to look to make sure that we have the best people that can really do the work, that can folks that have, I'll be looking for folks that have been proven that they can get things done. I am also making sure that we are representing all facets of Vermont society, not just sort of the usual suspects wandering the halls in Montpelier when we used to do that sort of thing. And if you have suggestions of the specific people that I have, you all have access to the legislation itself, but I will be appointing one member with expertise and professional experience in the design and implementation of programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, somebody representing rural communities, municipal government, distribution utilities, a statewide environmental organization, the fuel sector, somebody with expertise in climate change science, and manufacturers. So those are the categories that I have responsibility for. The Senate Committee on Committees has responsibility for a different list. And so if you have specific suggestions where I have responsibility, please feel free to email them to I think probably the best is M Johnson, as in Mitzi Johnson, M Johnson at ledge.state.vt.us, or speaker at ledge.state.vt.us. And I would also say that if you know somebody or have worked with somebody that you think is smart and passionate and can do, and is willing to work towards an operationalized plan, even if they don't fit neatly in one of those categories, please let me know, because you don't quite know where they're going to fit in, or how that work is happening. I think, and I would say do that very soon, like within the next few days. I hope to be narrowing down some lists next week, because this is critical work to be done, and it has to be done quickly.
Thank you, Speaker. And I'll just note that in the chat here on the stage, thank you, Senator Bray, for listing out the appointments that will be made on the Senate side by the Committee on Committees. And thank you for providing your email address there. One last question as we wrap up. When I refreshed Slido, I saw how it had shot up in the number of upvotes. Want to quickly ask this as our final question from Richard Fazy with the Energy Futures Group. Can we require an energy label on every home in order to communicate the performance of that home as they're bought, sold, and rented?
Was a question, can we, should we, Jared?
It was written as can we, but I think you should feel free to answer it as a should or however.
So, you know, I can say absolutely we should be doing this, but I also just want to say we have been trying to just get enforcement on our building codes for years around efficiency building, and so the changes come slowly. It is a messy process, and we wanted to make sure that contractors would have to be fully licensed to be able to do work, and that they were up to code. And in the end, you know, all we could get in the messiness of making legislation was a rather tepid certification program with the Secretary of State's office. Now, is it better than nothing? It is better than nothing. It's moving us towards accountability. But although I believe that we should be able to have these labels, I know the work of actually getting that through both chambers is a difficult one. And so I'd love to hear the speaker's take on this as well.
I think Senator Balint summed it up very well. We did make some important initial steps just a few weeks ago in improving training and certifications. That's still a voluntary basis, but at least it's an initial step towards this. There's been talk of rental registry to help us understand what rental units are out there, and I think this is a part of that conversation to help understand the performance of those rental units as well. And I think it's a terrific idea. There are a few things that we have required disclosure for on the sale of a home: radon, lead, some basic environmental and health issues, and basically climate performance is a 21st century health and environmental issue that falls into the same category. So I think it's an interesting idea to consider, and I think we've got to figure out how to make it work within our regulatory framework, and to make sure that we're not, that we're not leaving people behind as we do this. The more regulations and constraints and expense we put on, the larger gap we create between who's included and excluded in Vermont, and that is really of deep concern, particularly where we're coming out of a health and economic crisis in the pandemic that has highlighted and deepened those existing chasms.
So one other thing, Jared, Senator Bray has reminded me that there is a working group working on this specific issue. So hopefully they will come back to the legislature with some recommendations for how we can move closer to this.
Great.
So that's in the work.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for sharing questions. Sorry.
All right. And Jared,
Yes,
I just wanted to,
please go ahead, Chairman.
I just wanted to add two things to this particular conversation. First of all, there is been for years a statute that was called the Truth in Lending Law, passed in Congress, and many states have adopted similar, which required a disclosure. It seems to me that that's a fairly straightforward approach to some of the questioners' interests, namely, a truth in carbon, if you will, that simply requires you to disclose what's the carbon footprint of the thing that you're selling. The second thing is that law is pretty strong on the question of what kind of disclosures a homeowner must make when they sell their home. If you know that you've got a hazardous waste dump a half a mile of where your home is located, you're obligated to make that known as part of the information you give to a prospective buyer. It seems to me that that same principle, without new legislation, could be applied as a common law matter, that if you would have to disclose, as you do now, what your energy use is, and how much electricity or how much gas or how much oil that home uses over the course of a year. So there are some mechanisms to get information in of the buyers, provided that the buyers are sufficiently know what that information means.
Thank you
in
so
terms
much.
Of
Chairman,
whether
thank
they
you,
wanna
Madam
buy
Speaker,
that
Senator
house.
Ballant. I wish we had more time for questions. Thank you for those who were posting them. Just really appreciate you taking the time to discuss these important issues with us, to engage with this really dedicated and diverse network. So grateful for all of your engagement and leadership. Thanks for all you do.